Happy Monday! It's June 1st. Can you believe it? We made it all the way to June. It's a miracle. This is lesson 2 for the Human Impacts Unit. Before we start lesson 2, I'm just going to go over lesson 1. So you'll get to see the answers here, and then you can review your answers. So in lesson 1, we talked about the different types of point source pollution. The 2 specific locations that point source pollution can come from are drain pipes and ditches. We also talked about how can it be controlled or treated. It can be controlled or treated before water is released into a body of water. 3 common point source discharges. You can pick any of these. All 7 were listed in the picture. This is in the way. Let's get rid of that. All 7 were listed in a picture. It was like a circle of little pictures. There's combined sewer overflow, the municipal separate. So like the houses are municipal and then the streets are municipal separate. Concentrated animal feeding operations, incidental vessel discharges. That's actually something in Florence that you would actually have happen because there's a lot of ships that travel on the Delaware River right next to the school even. That loud noise is my washing machine. I'm sorry if it's bothering you. Non-municipal would be industrial and construction, getting into stormwater, all are point source discharges. True or false? Non-point source pollution does not come from a specific location. That's true. If you look at slide 9, you're looking at the pictures. List 1 source of point source pollution. So the example would be wastewater treatment plant. And 1 source of non-point source pollution could be any of these things: suburban development, city streets, rural homes, cropland, and the animal feedlot. So all of those fall in that category. Okay, if you have any questions about lesson 1, hit me up. All right, so we're moving on to lesson 2, and you will have to complete this fabulous document about lesson 2. I don't know, I'm feeling happy because it's June, so I'm a little weird today. And also I have a headband on. I don't know. All right. So this is slides 10 through 16. Slides 10 through 16 in your slide section. Notice that I have the teacher edition, and I'll be opening that up. All righty. So today we're just going to talk about some of the different types of things that pollute water. Okay. The first 2, actually all of them, some people in some areas don't necessarily encounter all of these things, but Florence has experiences all of them. So types of water pollution, there are 7: sediment, pesticides, fertilizers, sewage, metals, oil and gasoline, and heating. It says heated, and that sounds weird, like heated water pollution. Strange. But what it means is hot water being let go into an area that's not hot. All right? And we'll talk more about that one later. Today we're going to talk about sediment, and we're going to talk about pesticides. Okay? So first we have sediment. Sediment is loose material such as rock fragments, mineral grains that is moved by erosion, which you learned about in 7th grade. So water, wind breaks up rock, and then it's carried by water away from the area. So you find sediment everywhere there's running water, because running water breaks down rock, and then that material, that dust basically, is pushed through by the moving water. And if you have standing water, then it just sinks to the bottom. In moving water, it sinks to the bottom as it flows down. So you usually end up with a lot of actual examples of this. So the largest source of water pollution in the United States is actually sediment. It makes the water cloudy. It blocks sunlight, which means no photosynthesis is occurring, and it prevents oxygen for developing organisms because they can't reach the sunlight. Do they have anything else? So here's a picture of sediment pollution, and you're basically seeing where a river is letting into another area or tributaries running out. And you can see it's such a different color because it's filled with sediments. So before I go on, because I feel like this video would be super short if I didn't expand on this a little bit. Some of you might know I studied marine biology when I was in college. And we did lots of water quality testing. I went on lots of field trips for that. And one of the tools that we use is called a Secchi disc. And it's basically a little black and white circle. Let me see if I can find a picture of it for you. And I'm spelling it wrong. No, I'm spelling it right. You lowered it into the water, and when you couldn't see it anymore, here's a perfect picture, you would know how clear the water is. So you need to have a specific length of rope, and it's usually marked. Ours were marked with knots at each length, and you basically drop it in. So if you imagine dropping it into this water, once you cannot see the differentiation in color, like the white between the black where they're touching, then you would mark where that was at the water level. You pull the disc back up, and it tells you how deep in the water you can see. So if you were watching a movie and they say, oh, the field of water that you can see down is 100 feet. How do they know you can see down 100 feet? They measured it using that tool. Sediment is a big problem in a lot of industrial areas like the Delaware River. One thing that happens is if you left it alone, over time, all the sediments would sink to the bottom of the river, and they actually change the course of the river. If we had more time, I would teach you all about how rivers develop oxbows, and they change course, and they dump out and develop a delta. Like the Mississippi River leads out into a delta, which has lots of little islands. I'm sure there'll be a picture. Perfect. Instead of the water just draining straight out, it's starting to fill up with little spots of land. This is actually how land is created at the end of a river. And the river twists and turns. And you can kind of tell the age of areas or the age of rivers by how many twists and little things they have going on there. And that's from sediment. So it's a natural, normal process. But if you're taking that water and using it to farm with or to drink, then you're getting all of that sediment when you drink it. So it needs to be cleared out before you drink it. You would also not want to put all that dirt on your crop because you don't know where it came from. It might be too alkaline, or it might be too acidic. And alkaline is the opposite of acidic. You don't want to necessarily put that on your plants depending on where you live. So sediment is a problem. All right, pesticides. Pesticide is any substance used for destroying insects and other organisms that are harmful to cultivated plants as well as animals. So any place that you're growing a crop, if you put anything on it to prevent other organisms from either eating it or getting near it, that's a pesticide. So maybe it's not necessarily a chemical, but it's something that isn't normally there. One of the major chemicals of pesticide that is a pollutant is called DDT. And they stopped using it, so it's not being put onto the surface of any crops anymore. But it didn't necessarily go away. So we'll talk about that. Pesticides have a lot of issues because 90% of them reach a destination other than their target species. There's a typo right there. THEIR. Sorry. That means that they are affecting organisms that they weren't meant to. So only 2% of pesticides only affect the one target organism. Other organisms might be killed. One problem with that would be like bees, for example. Perhaps you don't want a certain type of hornet to come and affect your crop, but you still want bees to come. But whatever pesticide you're using doesn't just kill hornets, it also kills the bees. That's one example. Or perhaps if you are trying to get rid of a specific type of worm, then you are using a pesticide that kills the worms. Wonderful. But it also will affect birds that are eating those worms or any other organism that might be in that area. So that's just like the surface layer of the food crop. Then the runoff of pesticides can be carried to aquatic environments. It can leave the area where you sprayed it or applied it, and through water runoff, same as the sediment, is carried into the water. So now you have a pesticide that was meant for a crop on the ground in soil that's now been washed into a stream, into a river, into the ocean. Wind can also carry pesticides. A lot of times they're sprayed from airplanes, like little tiny airplanes that will go over the field and spray. And then it might go to a non-intended area. Now, sometimes the benefits to a sprayed pesticide may outweigh the negatives. For example, mosquitoes. There's other organisms like the tsetse fly, generally like flying insects that are really dangerous to human health. Mosquitoes carry all kinds of bloodborne diseases that you don't necessarily want. So spraying a pesticide to rid yourself of the mosquito is more of a benefit than the actual pesticide getting into your food and water, which sounds like terrible, but it's kind of true. So when they're spraying, though, instead of getting on the areas that they might want it to go because it's windy, it might go onto a pasture or go into housing or go into an aquatic area. Again, now it's in the water supply, which is what we're talking about. Water pollution. Okay, so here's a little graphic that just talks about pesticides. So there's a lot of different things that can happen here. We can talk about point source contamination, like we put the pesticide down. So here's what we're talking about. Here's the crop, and here's the deposition, okay? So, of course, it's going to run into this tributary right here, and then into the main water source. So that is point source contamination. This pesticide is coming from this crop, okay? You can have it get into the ground here, and then kind of flush this way all throughout this land. And if there's any smaller water areas here, and then again into the main water area. As you're spraying it here, it can spray, drift this way. The wind is pushing it across. Then you have it here. And it didn't make it all the way to the water and then evaporated. So now it's in the air, in the atmosphere. That pesticide now in the air, because maybe it's in teeny tiny droplet form, you can't even see it, would then be able to travel short and long distances through the water cycle. So now it's in the air, and as it rains, it gets washed out down into the ground again in a totally different area than it was applied. The other type we see here is it's going down into the ground, just right underneath of where it was sprayed, and then eventually leaching, and then eventually getting into the groundwater. So the groundwater is the water that you drink. That's why there's water towers everywhere. They pull up from the groundwater. It's way below the surface. But over time, and this is why pesticides are a problem, this type of diffuse spraying and this going into the waterway, we could kind of clean that up. But once it seeps into the ground, what are we going to do? Are you going to dig up all the ground and take it all out? Remember, we're talking about teeny tiny chemicals here that are, you don't see them anymore once you spray it. So how are we going to clean that up? So it seeps into the groundwater, then the drainage is applied to the groundwater. It's just all running together. Getting into the water source, basically, is what this graphic is showing us. And something else about pesticides, so I brought up this from the USGS, or the U.S. Geological Survey, which is basically the government's, that's my washer, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that it was running when I started this. And it'll stop, I promise. So the USGS monitors all kinds of data about geology in the United States. Sorry, it's super distracting. Okay, so the USGS monitors all of the geology of the United States. They deal with earthquakes, rock slides, all that stuff, groundwater, pesticides. So they're like kind of a government organization. It's kind of like NASA, but for earth science instead of space science. Same thing. So they have a lot of good information on here if you're interested. So they have photo galleries, etc. But one thing that I wanted to just point out in their overview here was that we're one of the largest food producer. We are the largest food producer in the world, but it comes at a price of pesticides in the groundwater. So some of the pollutants that were used, so they have another very similar picture where they talk about how these pollutants get into the water. One thing they want to talk about is how long they last. Okay. Something that was applied to a field in the 1950s is now very slowly making its way through the soil. Okay. The soil layers are really thick before you get to the groundwater, or the recharge is what it's called down here. So it's going to take a long time to get there. So it has to be constantly monitored just to make sure. So that's why we have each township, each state has water quality controls and testing just to make sure that this stuff isn't getting there. Okay. They take a really long time. There is a time lag between the application of pesticide and fertilizers. It decreases with, depending on the type of ground that you have, is what it's talking about here. And it can take decades for that water to be cleaned. Decades. That's tens of years. So something that might have been applied to the ground when I was a kid isn't even through into the water system yet. And I'm a lot older than you, so it takes a long time. It's like one of those slow moving things. So we want to make sure that we are monitoring this to make sure that that pollution isn't getting to us. And another thing that in the United States we're definitely trying to do is to limit the amount of pesticides that are being used and to make sure they're only targeting the organisms that we want them to. Okay? So just double check that you can answer all of these questions. Yep, looks good. So you're going to finish lesson 2, these questions, and submit them. Make sure you submit them. I notice there are some people that have been doing it but not clicking submit. And when I go through Google Classroom, it's so much easier if I can see done, because then I have to go into the missing and see, well, is it really missing? So please just click turn it in when you finish. Hope you guys are having an excellent Monday. Happy June 1st again. We only have 4 more lessons with me. I really miss you. I hope you're having a great day. Bye.